The studio lights buzzed softly overhead, a quiet hum beneath the storm of anticipation brewing in the control room. America was about to witness one of the most highly anticipated interviews of the year, and no one, not even the host himself, realized he was walking into a verbal ambush he wouldn't recover from. The setting was the primetime slot of Clearview Tonight, a progressive political talk show known for its aggressive questioning, sharp edits, and viral confrontations. At the center of it all sat David Rourke, a celebrated liberal host whose specialty was dismantling conservative guests in real time, or at least that was the reputation he cultivated. Tonight, the guest was Pam Bondi, former Attorney General, legal heavyweight, political firebrand. To some, she was a conservative gladiator with a steel-trap mind. To others, a lightning rod who never backed down from a fight. But everyone agreed on one thing. Pam Bondi was tough. And if anyone could flip the script on David Rourke's carefully curated takedowns, it would be her. Backstage, the crew buzzed as producers triple-checked graphics, links and gotcha questions loaded onto the teleprompter. "She's ready," one assistant said, nodding toward the green room. "Let her cook for a minute," David replied smugly, sipping from a mug with his own face on it. This won't take long. He was wrong. When Pam entered the studio, everything shifted. She didn't walk with the stiff posture of someone expecting to be attacked. She walked like someone who had read the whole playbook and marked up the margins in red ink. She took her seat opposite David, microphone clipped, posture calm but alert. David leaned in, smiled that performative smile built for viral moments, and said, "Pam, thanks for being here. I know some people say you're a little controversial." Pam tilted her head just slightly. "Is that a question or your opener?" David blinked. And the studio, from the boom mic operator to the executive producer watching behind the glass, felt it. She had just turned the first line of the show into the first counterpunch. He chuckled nervously. "Let's talk facts, shall we?" Pam smiled. "Please do. I brought a few." She reached under the table and pulled out a slim folder marked Verified, Unredacted, Public. David glanced at it, thrown off for just a moment, but he recovered quickly, nodding to his producers for the first segment cue. The interview had begun. But this wasn't going to be a standard grilling. Pam hadn't come to defend herself. She'd come to flip the spotlight. And what she said in the next 10 minutes would make millions of Americans lean in and leave one of the most outspoken liberal voices in the country completely, utterly speechless. The red light blinked. They were live. David Rourke straightened in his chair, wearing the practiced smirk of a man who'd turned on-camera confrontation into a brand. He raised an eyebrow, gesturing toward the slim folder now resting between them like a loaded weapon. "So, Pam," he said, "I understand you've come prepared, a rarity on this show." Pam Bondi didn't flinch. "Preparation is the difference between a conversation and an ambush," she replied smoothly. "And I don't do ambushes. I do facts." David chuckled, turning to camera 2. "Ladies and gentlemen, let the record show we're starting with facts." She opened the folder. Page 1 was a printout. Headlines, reports, dates, all public, all recent. Each one highlighted in yellow. "David," she said, locking eyes with him, "you've accused people like me of eroding democracy because we ask questions. Let's ask a few of our own. Why did your network refuse to cover the congressional whistleblower report released 3 weeks ago that directly contradicted the narrative you pushed on this very show?" David leaned in, suddenly cautious. "I'm sorry. Are we already pivoting to whataboutism?" Pam turned the document toward the camera. "No pivot, just precision. You've built a reputation by shaming your guests with carefully edited gotchas, cherry-picked clips, and surface-level factoids. But I've come with the context you leave out. And I'm giving it to you live, no edits." David tried to steer the conversation back. "Well, if we're talking about context, perhaps you can explain why you defended legislation that critics say disenfranchises voters." Pam raised her hand calmly. "Absolutely. But first, can you explain why your network's own investigative journalist quietly retracted a voter suppression story 4 months ago after a FOIA request proved it was sourced from an activist blog?" The control room panicked. Producers were scrambling to pull the clip. David's earpiece lit up with voices. "Change segment. Pivot to next card. Bring up social issue." But David held his ground, trying to regain momentum. Pam, with respect, this isn't a courtroom. This is, she interrupted gently. It's exactly a courtroom, David. You brought the accusation. I'm offering the evidence. And then she dropped the next bomb. One of your top contributors labelled me an election denier, but failed to mention I was a federal prosecutor who worked on election fraud before it was a trending hashtag. Would you like me to read the case files? They're in the folder. Silence. David blinked. Behind the glass, a stunned producer whispered, "She's dismantling him with his own facts." Pam continued, her tone sharpening, not hostile, but commanding. I didn't come here to throw punches. I came here to ask why Americans are expected to sit down, shut up, and accept the narratives cooked up in green rooms instead of war rooms. She slid another document across the desk. This is a copy of your show's media prep guide, publicly leaked. It says, and I quote, "Never let the guest define the terms." David's face changed. No more smirk, no more polished poise. Because for the first time in his career, he wasn't interviewing a guest. He was facing a cross-examination. And Pam Bondi wasn't even close to finished. Behind the camera glass, chaos had erupted. Producers barked into headsets, segment notes were thrown aside. The show's teleprompter froze mid-scroll. Graphics meant to frame Pam Bondi as controversial former AG were quietly pulled. Because the moment she opened that folder, she didn't just bring receipts, she rewrote the rules. David Rourke adjusted in his chair, visibly sweating now. The studio lights, normally flattering and controlled, seemed to grow hotter with every word Pam spoke. "Let's talk about January 6th, he said quickly, reaching for familiar territory, home turf. "You've been accused of fueling the rhetoric that led to." Pam didn't even blink. "David, have you ever read my full remarks, or just what HuffPost paraphrased in a tweet?" She pulled out a page. "This is my full statement, delivered January 4th, 2 days before the riot. In it I said, and I quote, 'All protests must be peaceful, lawful, and protected by the Constitution.' Yet you ran a segment accusing me of subversive encouragement." She leaned in. "That's not journalism. That's libel with lighting." The audience, small but in studio, shifted. Some looked shocked. A few smiled in disbelief. One of the interns silently mouthed, "She brought the transcript." David tried to interject. "Well, it's not always about what's said. It's about what's not said, Pam. And you've aligned yourself with individuals who..." Pam cut in, her voice suddenly sharper. "Aligned? Let's talk alignment." She held up a new sheet. "A guest booking list from David's show last year. These are your guests, and next to their names, public statements. Some calling half the country extremists, others questioning court rulings they didn't like. Not a single retraction, not a single challenge. You gave them a platform, but you call me dangerous for asking questions with citations." David's lips parted, but he had no rebuttal ready. Pam pressed on. "This show's supposed to be a platform for debate, right? So here's a debate. Why are dissenting voices treated like enemies of the state, while inaccurate but convenient opinions go unchecked because they serve a narrative?" David blinked. Pam's voice lowered now, slow, deliberate. "You say you're the voice of truth, but truth doesn't fear questioning. Propaganda does." That quote would go viral in under an hour. Truth doesn't fear questioning. Propaganda does. David sat back, visibly rattled. His eyes darted to the teleprompter, still frozen. "No help coming." "Pam," he said slowly, "I think we need to go to a commercial." Pam tilted her head. "Of course you do." And she folded her hands, not in retreat, but in triumph. Because everyone watching knew, David Rourke wasn't pausing the segment. He was escaping it. The screen faded to black. 30 seconds of soft piano music played over an ad for eco-friendly sneakers, a feeble attempt by the network to reset the temperature, but it wasn't working. Online, clips of Pam Bondi's opening salvo had already gone viral. The moment she said, "That's not journalism, that's libel with lighting," had racked up 1.2 million views across X and TikTok during the commercial break. In the studio, David Rourke was fuming behind a forced smile. "All right," he said to his producer through gritted teeth, mic hot, "we pivot. Back to the book bans, or the immigration clip from last year, something that plays emotionally. I need to win a round." Pam didn't flinch. She heard it all. They were back in 5, 4, 3, and just like that, the show returned. David plastered on his grin. "We're back on Clearview tonight with former Attorney General Pam Bondi. Let's move to some cultural issues. There's been criticism of your party for banning books in schools. Pam held up her hand. Not interrupting. Correcting. Let's not say your party, David. Let's say elected school boards. And let's not say banning books when the actual issue is age-appropriate curation. David pushed, confident again. So you're saying you support pulling literature from classrooms? I support parents having a say in what their children are exposed to at age 7 versus age 17. You frame that as fascism. I frame it as parental rights. Boom. The audience stirred again. The air was electric. David leaned in, grasping for footing. Well, some say your version of parental rights edges into discrimination. Pam smiled politely. Some say a lot of things, David, like that this show is balanced. Shall we talk about that? She reached into the folder again, pulled out data. According to media tracking over the past 12 months, your guest-to-host interruption ratio skews 4-1 when interviewing conservatives. You cut off your right-leaning guests an average of 23 times per segment. You interrupt liberal guests twice, if at all. She looked him dead in the eye. I've counted 7 interruptions since we started. David said nothing. So here's a question I'll ask. Why does a liberal host with a platform, producers and a national audience need to silence a guest to win an argument? Another bomb. Another quote already being tweeted with screen grabs. If your argument is strong, why silence mine? David tried again. What about immigration? You were criticized for your comments about the border being a national security risk. Pam leaned in. I was a prosecutor in Florida. I've seen what fentanyl does. You haven't. I've stood over overdose victims. I've met families shattered by cartel-linked trafficking. Don't talk to me about optics, David. I've lived the consequences of your talking points. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a dismantling. And David Rourke was no longer interviewing Pam Bondi. He was standing in a storm he helped create and watching her walk through it, untouched. David Rourke sat motionless for a beat too long, as if waiting for his next line to fall from the ceiling. It didn't, because in his ear something else had arrived. David, his producer whispered urgently, pivot now. You're losing control of the audience. Your name is trending and not in a good way. He blinked, eyes flickering between the camera and the woman calmly sitting across from him like a lioness who hadn't even started hunting yet. Pam Bondi knew. She saw it in his posture, in the slightly forced exhale, the subtle tension in his jaw. She didn't need to hear what the producer said. She knew what it meant. America was watching, and David's throne was splintering beneath him. He cleared his throat. Pam, I want to be fair here. She smiled. David, fair would have been starting this conversation with an open mind, not a loaded script. A chuckle from someone in the audience. The atmosphere shifted again. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was a shift in gravity. David scrambled. Let's talk about January 6th again. Surely you agree it was an insurrection? Pam didn't take the bait. I agree it was wrong. I agree crimes were committed. I also agree that burning courthouses, seizing police stations, and attacking federal officers for 120 straight days in 2020 was wrong. She waited. Let it hang. You didn't call that an insurrection. You called it activism. David's hands stiffened slightly on the desk. Pam flipped to another page. This is a transcript from your show, July 2020. You said, and I quote, sometimes unrest is necessary to be heard. She leaned forward just slightly. So tell me, why is your outrage selective? Why do your riots earn sympathy, while our concerns earn subpoenas? Boom. The air thickened. Even the studio lights felt dimmer now, like they were backing away. Online? Exploding. Pam unchained MediaViz truth. Your riots earn sympathy. Our concerns earn subpoenas. David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His voice, for once, had nowhere to go. Because the people watching weren't angry at Pam. They were angry at him. And the audience in the studio? They were shifting. You could feel it. Some arms crossed, some nods. One young woman up front even mouthed, wow. Back in the control room, the assistant producer panicked. She's flipping the crowd. Cut the interview, someone whispered. Play the end bumper. Now. But David didn't call for it. He couldn't. Because deep down, he realized something terrifying. Pam wasn't playing to his audience anymore. She was speaking to hers, and they had just walked into the room. The tension in the studio had shifted from dramatic to historic. David Rourke sat frozen in his chair, face taut, words slow to form. Across from him, Pam Bondi remained poised, unbothered, focused, still flipping through the folder that had already dismantled the show's narrative like a house of cards in a hurricane. Then she struck again, this time straight through the fourth wall. "You know what the real problem is, David?" she said, not looking at him now but past him, straight into camera one. "You're not losing this debate because I'm clever. You're losing because the people watching have already lived through the consequences of your talking points." A producer's voice in David's earpiece. "She's breaking the wall. Cut the feed. Fade to logo." "No," said another voice. "Let her bury him. The ratings are gold." Pam leaned closer to the camera. "Millions of Americans have been mocked, cancelled, or fired for saying the exact things I'm saying right now. But they didn't have a mic. I do, and I'm not going to waste it pretending your hypocrisy isn't visible from space." David exhaled sharply, trying to jump back in. "So now it's about victimhood?" Pam turned to him, cold and calm. "No, it's about vindication. You spent years telling people they were crazy for questioning censorship, corruption, collusion between government and media. Now we have documentation, receipts, whistleblowers, and what do? She pointed at him. "You pivot, you smear, you throw labels like conspiracy theorist because you're afraid of what happens when people stop whispering and start testifying." Boom. Another clip, another instant meme. "Stop whispering, start testifying." David laughed nervously. "This is turning into a campaign speech." Pam nodded once. "You're right, a campaign for truth. One you clearly didn't prepare for." Online viewership surged past 7 million. On Twitter, she was trending in 24 states. Pam Bondi, Bondi Uncensored, Clearview Meltdown, Vindication, Not Victimhood. Across the country, televisions in bars, barbershops, firehouses and living rooms blared the interview that was no longer an interview, but a reckoning. David tried one last time. "If everything is so wrong with the media, why come on this show?" Pam didn't blink, because this is exactly where the lies are told, and this is exactly where the truth belongs. Silence. No producer dared to cut to commercial now, because no one wanted to be the one who pulled the plug on the most explosive live interview in American television history. Something was happening that David Rourke had never experienced on his own show. He was losing the audience. Not just the viewers at home, the people in the studio. For years, Clearview Tonight had thrived on applause lines, tight scripting, and a loyal in-studio crowd trained to react on cue. But now? No cues, no claps, just an eerie, captivated silence, followed by something even rarer, a burst of applause. For Pam Bondi. It started with a few scattered claps, then built like a storm front. A slow rise of hands, a wave of approval. Not thunderous, not chaotic, just real. That kind of slow-building affirmation that says, we didn't come here to agree with her, but we can't deny she's making sense. David looked around, visibly rattled. His smile cracked. This was no longer his studio. Pam watched the shift. She didn't gloat, she didn't point. She just leaned in with surgical calm and said, truth doesn't need applause, but it always earns it eventually. The line echoed through the glass, echoed across Twitter, echoed into living rooms in real time. David, desperate to regain control, pulled his final card, emotion. "Let me ask you this, Pam," he said, his voice slow and low. "Do you feel any responsibility for the division in this country, for stoking fear, for escalating distrust?" She tilted her head. "David, do you feel any responsibility for pretending to be objective while pushing a narrative that told half the country they were too stupid, too racist, or too dangerous to deserve a voice?" David blinked. "And if you do," she continued, "then maybe we're both guilty. But only one of us has shown up today willing to be questioned." The audience inhaled as one. Pam turned again to the crowd. "Look, I know I'm not your typical guest, and I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to listen, the way no one listened to your neighbors, your co-workers, your family members who dared to question the script you were handed." The studio fell absolutely silent. Then one person stood, then another, a third, and then the clapping started again. Not from obligation, not on cue, from conviction. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was a rising. David looked like he was seeing a ghost. His show, his audience, his message had been flipped. And Pam, she didn't even have to raise her voice to do it. As the credits rolled and the cameras cut to black, something extraordinary happened. Pam Bondi stood, shook David Rourke's trembling hand, nodded once to the now standing studio audience, and walked out of the building with the same calm she entered with. No entourage. No cameras trailing her. But outside, the story was everywhere. The sidewalk outside the Clearview studio was packed with reporters who hadn't even been assigned to cover her. They had simply heard what was happening live through their own networks. Pam, did you plan that moment? Pam, did you expect the audience to turn? Pam, are you considering a run? She paused, just once, turned toward the cameras, and said, I didn't come to perform. I came to correct the record. The people did the rest. Mic drop again. By nightfall, major outlets were scrambling to keep up. Fox News ran the full interview, unedited. CNN tried to spin it with a late-night panel, but even two panelists admitted she brought facts and she brought receipts. Twitter/X lit up with edits, clips and commentary from both sides. Even Joe Rogan reposted a clip with one word, savage. Pam's quotes were now everywhere. Truth doesn't need applause. You gave your riots sympathy. You gave our concerns subpoenas. I didn't come to be agreeable. I came to be accurate. By 9 a.m. the next morning, she was booked on 4 different national morning shows. She turned down 3. Instead, she went live from her car. No lighting, no makeup, no fancy backdrop. Just her, a microphone, and 4.3 million people watching. Let's talk about what really happened last night, she began. That wasn't about me. It was about what happens when truth finally walks into a room where it's been shut out. She pulled out the same folder, the one from the show. Everything I said on live TV, I can prove. And now I want to hand this folder over to you. She scanned each page, uploaded them in real time. No paywall, no login, just facts. And as she finished, she looked into the lens and said, They invited me on TV hoping I'd slip up. Instead, they slipped, and now the whole country saw the floor was fake. That quote went nuclear. Within hours, universities were holding debates on the ethics of media gatekeeping. Independent journalists were fact-checking David Rourke. Meme pages made Bondi their new gladiator queen. And in small towns across America, people were saying something they hadn't said in a while. Did you hear what she said last night? Because Pam didn't just survive a political ambush. She turned it into a movement. While Pam Bondi's impromptu livestream continued climbing past 7 million views, inside the headquarters of Clearview Media, the mood had changed from smug confidence to full-blown crisis mode. David Rourke sat in his private office, face pale, collar loosened, a half-finished coffee going cold beside untouched notes for his next show. On his laptop screen, clip after clip of his own face frozen in shock as Pam Bondi dismantled his talking points live, without raising her voice once. Every frame was now a meme. When the script fails you. Clearview? More like clear fail. David Rourke, the interviewer who got interviewed. His phone buzzed again. Another text from his producer. HQ wants a statement. PR is writing something, but it won't help unless you respond. But David had no idea what to say, because nothing he could say would change the fact that he lost a live debate on his own turf, with his own rules. In the halls of the studio, whispers swirled. He's cooked. She made him look small. They're pulling sponsors, 3 big ones. And it was true. By lunchtime, 3 major advertisers announced they were reviewing their association with Clearview tonight, citing a divergence from balanced content standards. Translation, the people weren't buying what they were selling anymore. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi? She wasn't attacking anyone. She was teaching, hosting Twitter spaces, answering questions, posting raw source-linked documents, going on independent platforms not for softball interviews, but to explain line by line what the media wasn't telling people. One journalist from a competing network tweeted, Pam Bondi didn't go viral, she reversed the broadcast tower. Back at Clearview, the damage was spreading. An internal leak revealed meeting notes where producers prepped David with emotionally loaded questions designed to destabilize the guest. Once exposed, it only fueled the narrative that Pam had walked into a setup and torched it with truth. Then, the inevitable happened. David Rourke logged in to post a carefully crafted tweet. Last night's exchange was intense. I believe in spirited debate and stand by my team. More to come. It backfired. The replies were brutal. Pam showed up with facts. You showed up with flashcards. The truth doesn't need a team. More to come? Please, no. Even some of David's regular viewers felt betrayed, because in that one 30-minute interview they saw what years of manufactured outrage and gotcha journalism had failed to reveal. Pam Bondi didn't fear the spotlight. She just waited for it to stop spinning. And once it did, she let truth speak. Now all that remained was what she'd do next. It had only been 5 days since the now legendary interview, but it felt like a political earthquake. The aftershocks rippled through every media outlet. Podcasts, newsrooms, social media. Everyone was talking about how Pam Bondi dismantled David Rourke on live television without raising her voice, dodging a question, or flinching once. Cable networks scrambled to respond. CNN launched a segment titled "The Danger of Populist Rhetoric Disguised as Reason." MSNBC called it an unchecked monologue. But the public wasn't buying it, because no matter what they called it, people had watched it. Unedited, uninterrupted, unforgettable. And then Pam made her move. She announced a national town hall, not on any major network, not hosted by elites, and not restricted to pre-approved questions. It would be live-streamed entirely by citizen journalists. The location? A local veterans hall in Sarasota, Florida. The invite? Open to anyone. The title of the event? No gatekeepers, just Americans. On the night of the town hall, the live-stream numbers broke records. Over 11 million people tuned in from laptops, phones, bars, firehouses, high schools and city halls. Pam stood in front of an old wooden podium. No suit, no teleprompter, no handlers. Behind her, pinned to the wall, was a printout of a quote from her Clearview interview. Truth doesn't fear questioning, propaganda does. She smiled softly and began, "The media wanted a meltdown. What they got was a mirror." The crowd erupted. "They tried to make me the story, but I'm just a messenger." Then she paused. "This is the part where most people expect me to announce something, a campaign, a foundation, a book." She looked into the camera. "But I didn't come here to launch me. I came to launch you." She turned, lifted a sealed folder and held it up. Inside this are names, platforms and communities that have been silenced. Whistleblowers, teachers, journalists, tech experts, parents, veterans. Starting tomorrow, I'll be handing the mic to them. Because I didn't win that debate. America did. That moment shattered the internet. Hand them the mic. No gatekeepers, Pam passed it. She didn't announce a run, she announced a movement. One where the podium wasn't for power, but for passing it on. Back in DC, a stunned strategist tweeted, "She didn't take the stage to claim power, she used it to give it away, and somehow that made her unstoppable." Pam Bondi walked off the podium. Behind her, one by one, citizens took the stage. A mother, a factory worker, a Marine, a nurse, a kid from Nebraska with a question no one had let him ask. And just like that, Pam Bondi didn't just go viral. She rewrote the script.